This is Kickass News. I'm Ben Mathis. If you're an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or even if you have a side gig, let me introduce you to Grasshopper, the entrepreneur's phone system. Grasshopper lets you send and receive calls and texts from your new business phone number. That way, you can run your business from anywhere and respond to clients quickly with Grasshopper's mobile apps. Grasshopper. Sign up today. Go to grasshopper.com/kick to get $20 off your first month. That's grasshopper.com/kick. And now, enjoy the podcast. Hi, I'm Ben Mathis. Welcome to Kickass News. Around this time last year, Microsoft founder and billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates tweeted to the class of 2017 with a book recommendation. He said, "If I could give each of you a graduation present, it would be this, the most inspiring book I've ever read." He was referring to The Better Angels of Our Nature, which argues that despite the ceaseless news about war, crime, and terrorism, violence has actually been in decline, and today we may be living in the most peaceful moment in our species' existence. It was written by Harvard professor, cognitive scientist, and best-selling author Steven Pinker, and now he's applying the same mixture of optimism and scientific data in his latest book, Enlightenment Now: The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress, which Bill Gates has hailed as his new favorite book of all time. According to Professor Pinker, if you think the world's coming to an end, think again. People are living longer, healthier, freer, and happier lives, and while our problems are formidable, the solution lies in the Enlightenment ideal of using reason and science. Today, Steven Pinker joins me on the podcast to reveal how the news media has become measurably more negative at the same time as our quality of life has dramatically improved. In fact, he'll outline the top 15 objective metrics of human progress, all of which point to one conclusion: life is getting better and better. He says fear of globalism and income inequality is greatly exaggerated and largely unfounded. He calls for more critical thinking and less political correctness in our universities, the embrace of humanism over tribalism, and for the left and the right to stop politicizing science. Plus, why Steven Pinker would love to ban people from referring to the Trump era as a post-truth society. Coming up with Dr. Steven Pinker in just a moment. Dr. Steven Pinker is one of the world's leading authorities on language and the mind, the recipient of several major awards for his teaching, books, and scientific research. Pinker is Harvard College professor and Johnstone Family Professor of Psychology at Harvard University. His popular and highly praised books include The Stuff of Thought, The Blank Slate, Words and Rules, The Language Instinct, and The Better Angels of Our Nature. He's written a new book now that's a New York Times bestseller, and it's been praised by people like Bill Gates, who called it his new favorite book of all time. The book is titled Enlightenment Now: The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress in Enlightenment. Steven Pinker, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you.
As a point of clarification, when you refer to the Enlightenment in this book, you're not talking about some kind of New Age concept. You're actually talking about the philosophical movement of the late 18th century, right?
That is right.
Now, remind us why that moment was such a turning point for humanity, in case anyone doesn't remember.
The development that is most easily associated with the Enlightenment would be the American Declaration of Independence and Constitution, which were written and debated by Enlightenment thinkers. Our framers and founders were very much a part of this intellectual movement, but it also took place in France and Scotland and Germany and England and the Netherlands. And it was the idea that we should not base our understanding on authority and dogma and doctrine and religious ideology, but think everything through for ourselves. Try to analyze the world with logic, with science, and that we should use our knowledge to try to make people better off, that we should figure out what morality consists of, not just by following God's commandments, but what can we justify when we argue amongst ourselves? Things like the people flourishing, the greatest number of people living long, healthy, happy lives. You can't really disagree with that, no matter what religion you subscribe to. That you should treat people as ends and not means to an end. That is, don't exploit people. Again, it doesn't matter what religion you belong to or no religion at all, and that's a pretty good basis for morality.
Well, I would think that in this day and age, the virtues that you just described ought to be self-evident. What does it say that you even felt the need to come to the defense of things like reason, science, and humanism?
Yeah, and to my own surprise, it's not as self-evident as you might think. So reason, people are often say, well, the Enlightenment thinkers thought that everyone was like Mr. Spock, that everyone was perfectly rational, and psychology shows us that we're filled with irrationality, so let's just give up on reason and fight demagoguery with demagoguery. I argue that's not what the Enlightenment thinkers themselves believed. They fully knew that humans are filled with biases and flaws, but what they argued was that if we adopt certain rules and norms and institutions, then we can be, as a society, smarter than any one of us is as an individual. So if you have a principle like free speech, that is, you can't punish someone for their opinion. If you have open debate, so that if an idea is proposed, you can try to shoot it down and see if it survives. If you look at evidence, particularly for beliefs about the world, and say, well, if your theory is right, then what predictions does it make? How can we determine whether it's true or false? Then we can achieve rationality as a group, even if every single one of us was not so rational.
Well, I've talked to a number of scientists and science communicators over the past year, and they all say the same thing, that science is under attack. And I want to get your opinion on that. Is that a little dramatic, or do you feel like there really is a concerted and/or increasing effort afoot to actually undermine science?
Science has been under attack, both from the right and the left, as a lot of scientific assertions are just rejected flat out by the right, such as the theory of evolution. In the academic left, there are many people who think that science is just another mythology. There's no reason we should think its claims are true. It's just one other belief system. And they often blame science for slavery and racism and genocide.
Irrespective of global warming, generally, aren't people pretty much pro-science? Is this a battle that we still need to fight?
Yeah, I think you're right that overall people who actually do believe in the findings of science, if they're going to have surgery, they're going to opt for anesthesia they're not worried about never waking up because they figure the science is pretty solid behind it. But there are a small number of issues that have just gotten turned into battlegrounds. They've turned into almost ideological litmus tests for which political party you affiliate with. And so the climate change has just become a dogma of the Republican Party. Almost every Republican believes that it's not caused by human activity.
Right.
Almost every Democrat believes that it is. And there are a small number of issues that just become kind of talking points or identity badges. And that's when people start to get irrational.
And you say that they need to start to depoliticize science and issues like climate change. Are there things that need to happen both on the right and the left in order to take the politics out of the equation and reach some measure of agreement on science, and specifically on climate change?
Yeah, I think on everything that the academic left and the political right both have been resistant to evidence from the other side. And we need to try to make our political discourse more like science in its ideal state, namely your ideology shouldn't matter, your status shouldn't matter. What matters is, do your theories make a prediction that turns out to be confirmed?
Yeah, and I wonder if part of the problem with the argument for global climate change is that on the right, too many people perceive it as an attack on capitalism, or perhaps even it's phrased in ways that seem like an attack on capitalism. And it gets mixed in with other issues that have nothing to do with the actual science of climate change.
That's right. And I think that's a huge mistake on the left, that if you use climate change as an excuse to tear down capitalism, well, a lot of people like capitalism. They don't want to see it torn down, and with good reason, because capitalist countries really are richer and freer than communist countries. We just compare South Korea and North Korea, for example. But it's a mistake to blur these issues and to use one as a great excuse to prosecute another.
You spend a lot of time making the case for progress in this book and combating what you call progressophobia. Where does this impulse to reject progress and focus on the negative come from?
Partly it's an illusion that comes from the news, that because the news is about stuff that happens, not stuff that doesn't happen. You never see a journalist saying, here I am reporting from a country that hasn't been at war for 40 years, or a city that has not been attacked by terrorists. The human mind judges risk and danger by examples that you can recall from memory. So as long as the number of wars and killings and diseases haven't fallen to zero, which they probably never will, there'll always be enough incidents to fill the news, since the mind doesn't really calibrate the things that it sees according to how many opportunities there were for it to take place. How big is the world? How many people are there? Then we can't really compensate and say, well, yeah, okay, there's still some homicides and terrorist attacks, but the vast majority of the world is actually at peace, and we just can't easily think that way.
Hasn't it always been that way, or has the tone of the news gotten more negative than it used to be?
Yeah, so I actually have a plot in the book. The book has 75 graphs because I know that people just won't believe me if I describe these things in words. I just got to show them that line snaking from the top left to the bottom right. And one of them comes from an algorithm that actually counted the number of positive and negative words in the news. And it found that from the 40s to the present, the New York Times has gotten more and more gloomy. And so has a sample of the world's broadcast news stories.
Really? Because I always think of the turn of the century and the muckrakers and that sort of thing. I imagine that must have been a pretty negative time
yes,
to be
right.
in the media then. But it has actually gotten objectively worse.
More negative since the 1940s,
Wow.
with some ups and downs. I think the early 60s there was some idealism about government and society, but then with Vietnam and Watergate, journalists especially thought of their roles as pointing out injustice and corruption. And I think that often they were so proud that they brought down Richard Nixon that they thought that was their permanent role.
Who in the media are the worst culprits? Is it social media, Fox News? Is it talk radio, Alex Jones?
Well, all of those are, I would say, much worse than the so-called mainstream media.
Right.
So for all of the flaws of CNN and the New York Times and USA Today, they do, and I know this because I've written for some of them. You can't just make stuff up. There really is fact-checking. They really have a reputation to uphold. But I think there are, at the same time, I think there are some biases of journalism that I tried to point out. And one of them is the equation of serious journalism with bad news.
Yeah, and I was interested to read that the negativity isn't exclusively the territory of the alt-right or Donald Trump. We all remember the American carnage speech at
Yes.
the inauguration. Everything is going to hell in a handbasket. You say that many on the left are actually reinforcing this idea kind of from the opposite side, but still reinforcing the idea that we live in this lawless hellhole of racism and violence and inequality. I guess it's hard to ignore if you're getting that message in stereo.
Exactly. I think that's exactly right. And the Democrats kind of unilaterally disarmed. They weren't going to say, hey, wait a sec, actually crime rate is close to an all-time low. And there are problems in the economy with some workers being displaced. But hey, remember the 70s when we had 18% inflation and double-digit unemployment and people lined up around the block just to get gasoline? Things were no picnic in those days either.
Now, let me play devil's advocate here a little bit then. What is the danger of taking that negative view of society? I mean, is it that it leads to apathy or what?
I think it can. I think that it can lead people to think, well, why throw money down a rat hole? It's just safer to help the poor.
Yeah.
Or why why look for the best policies if the poor will always be with you? And it can also lead to a kind of radicalism. If you think that every institution is failing, is in decline, the society just spiraling out of control, then you're going to be receptive to radicals who just want to tear everything down out of the hope that anything that rises from the ashes has got to be better than what we have now. It just couldn't be worse. Now, I think that is extremely dangerous because history tells us that things can get a whole lot worse. In fact, you don't even need history. Just look around the world. I mean, look at Venezuela, look at Turkey, look at the Middle East.
Well, yeah. On the other hand, if you believe that everything's just hunky dory, what is there to light a fire under us to strive even harder to improve, right?
Yeah, I think there's got to be an optimum level of pessimism. That is, or not even pessimism, just really accuracy. Reality, yeah, reality, exactly.
Well, you apply scientific perspective to, I think, about 15 measures of progress in this book. Walk us through just a few of those.
Well, we can begin with life itself. I mean, it doesn't get more important than that.
But isn't that subjective?
No. I mean, people die. You got a person walking around, then you got a corpse. That's
okay.
pretty. That's,
life expectancy.
Yeah, that's pretty objective.
Okay.
And so, most of human history, life expectancy at birth was around 30 years. I mean, now obviously didn't mean people dropped dead on the 30th birthday. It meant that there were a lot of babies that died, and then a smaller number of people made it into their 60s and 70s. But now it's in the developed world, it's 80, and even in the world as a whole, it's 71. So it's more than doubled. So that's an example. Famines used to strike any part of the world. There were famines in Russia, in Europe, in Italy, in South America. Now they take place only in the most war-torn and remote regions. And fewer people are undernourished. We've got a problem now of obesity, too many calories, not too few. Now, of course, that's a problem too, but of the problems that you have, it's much better to have an obesity problem than a starvation problem. Education. For most of history, very few people could read or write, just the elite, the 15% of the population. Now, worldwide, 80% of people under the age of 25 can read and write. Some diseases are being sent to the history books. We did it with smallpox. We're about to do it with polio, with guinea worm.
Right.
And rates of malaria have come way down. Rates of diarrhea that can kill kids. These aren't just nuisances. The number of wars, hard to believe, but has gone down. Especially wars between countries. There's still civil wars, but wars where country A declares war on country B and they line up their tanks and their battleships, that's kind of becoming a thing of the past. And the number of people killed in all wars, both international wars and civil wars, has been declining. It's gone up in the past few years because of the Syrian civil war, but still, even with that horrible war, it's not at the levels that the world had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which were much higher.
And you dig into that pretty deep in your previous book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. I was interested in something that you said either in that book or in this latest book, which is our attitudes about war have changed over history. It used to be that we viewed it as to die in battle was a noble thing and was something to aspire to. It was a way to get off of the farm and do something that your family can be proud of. And now we view it as a horrible mistake. It's nothing to aspire to.
That's right. Now, even when wars are fought, they're considered a last resort, a way to bring about something better at some sacrifice. But 100 years ago, I should say really 105 years ago, because it all changed after World War I, there was this idea that war is inherently a good thing, not a bad thing, that it was heroic, it was spiritual, it was manly, and that peace was awful because it would lead to decadence and consumerism and selfishness and hedonism and effeminacy, and that to be a manly, virile society, you had to go to war, even if there was nothing in particular to fight about, just because war was healthy. So now what happened, of course, is World War I happened under that theory, and the carnage was horrific. That was real carnage.
That was the turning point.
15 million deaths. And afterwards, to romanticize war would have been in bad taste at best.
We're going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back with more with Dr. Steven Pinker when we come back in just a minute. Hey guys, it's never a good look when you untuck a long, bulky dress shirt. You may think it makes you look casual, but more than likely, it just ends up looking sloppy. That's why Untuck It makes shirts specifically designed to be worn untucked. Untuck It shirts are a go-to for any occasion, from casual to dressy. They offer casual shirts that are not too long and not too short. They're just right. These shirts are designed so well, GQ calls them perfection. And not only do they look good, they feel great. In fact, I'm wearing one right now. I just ordered some shirts from Untuckit, and this classic blue chambray button-down has instantly become my new favorite shirt. I've already worn it twice since I got it a week ago. The fit is great, it's 100% cotton, so it breathes, and it's the perfect length. I never used to go untucked before because my old shirts were so long that frankly I looked like a little bit of a moron. But with my Untuckit shirts, I've got stylish casual down. My girlfriend even said my Untuckit shirt actually makes me a cooler guy. Now, maybe that may be a bridge too far, but guess what? They've got her covered too, because Untuckit now makes shirts for women. Shirts for her that are casual, versatile, and designed to last. Log on to untuckit.com now and check out all their new arrivals. And use the promo code KICK for 20% off your entire purchase. You can also visit one of Untuckit's more than 25 retail locations across the country. So stop hiding your shirt with your pants, or your pants with your shirt. Untuckit.com, your solution for perfecting casual. Use promo code KICK for 20% savings. I recently had a very big milestone in my life. A few weeks ago, I decided to propose to my girlfriend, and when I did, I turned to adiamor.com for the perfect engagement ring. I shopped around for a month or two, looked online and in person, and no one beat adiamor.com for the best price and the very best quality. I even went down and met with the owner, Sam, in person, shook his hand, looked him in the eye, and talked about what I was looking for in a ring. He's a straight shooter, Sam, and I don't think I've ever met anyone who knows more about diamonds. He should, because his family's been in the jewelry business since 1950. Eventually, I decided on a stunning 3-carat oval stone in a beautiful 3-stone trillion setting, and my new fiancé couldn't be happier. Visit adiamor.com/kick and browse their huge selection of diamonds to choose from. You can go on their site and try different diamonds with different settings until you come up with the perfect ring for you or the woman you love. All of Adiamor's diamonds are GIA certified, and their rings have a lifetime guarantee against material defects. Plus, Adiamor even gives you 30 days to evaluate the deal and make sure that you're 100% happy with your purchase. That's because the folks at Adiamor know that once you find a jeweler you can trust, you've got a jeweler for life, and you'll keep coming back year after year. But hey, don't take it from me. Take a look at the reviews on Yelp and do yourself a favor. If you're shopping for an engagement ring or a gift, even if you think you're going to buy from another dealer, before you make that big decision, you owe it to yourself to click on adiamor.com/kick, look at their selection and compare. That's adiamor.com/kick, adiamor.com/kick. Their quality and prices speak for themselves, and my fiancé and I couldn't be happier. And now, back to the show. Do all of these different metrics of progress cut across all socioeconomic groups?
They do, although they're highly uneven. They do benefit the wealthy more than the poor. But the poor have come up as well, especially globally, where extreme poverty has fallen to 10% of the population. It was 3 times that high just a couple of decades ago. So the wealthy have done well, but the poor have as well.
Interesting, because we hear so much about income inequality these days. So that gap is not actually getting wider, or is it just maybe within this country that's getting wider?
It is getting wider within the country. It's not getting wider across the world as a whole.
But even if it is getting wider, if things are progressing overall, and maybe certain groups are progressing more than other groups, but everyone's still progressing, maybe are we focusing on the wrong thing then?
Well, I tend to think that what's more important is the people at the lower end of the scale than the gap between the upper and the lower end.
Okay.
That with an economy that's finding new sources of wealth, particularly on a global scale, where people involved in companies, in finance, in creative work now have a gargantuan worldwide market, and those who don't are just not going to get as rich. So some increase in inequality is, I think, inevitable. We don't have to exaggerate it. We can still have effects that reduce it, such as a graduated income tax or even a graduated wealth tax. But the The best ways to reduce inequality in a hurry are war, famine, epidemics, and state collapse. So that's not something that we should be aggressively pursuing.
Another thing that people talk about a lot these days and was a big subject of the 2016 election was globalism. Trump thinks that we're being hurt by globalism, thinks free trade is a bad thing and immigration's a bad thing. Is there any objective evidence that America is actually worse off because of globalism?
Overall, the world is much better off because of globalization. But particularly big countries like China and India and Bangladesh and countries in Africa, where they get to sell their goods on a worldwide market. It benefits the vast majority of American consumers because stuff is cheaper. Anyone who's gone into a Walmart or a Target knows that you can buy an amazing amount of stuff now for not that much money, clothing and furniture and appliances. But not everything can help everyone all the time. That would be magic. That wouldn't be progress. And there is some evidence that in some American manufacturing towns, the rise of globalization has hurt them, that factories have shut down. But in terms of policy, it's not clear that we should, say, raise the price of clothing for the 40 million American poor people, make it harder for them to buy clothes for their kids, to save a few tens of thousands of jobs in the garment industry, when the economy is always churning. There are always jobs that are disappearing, new jobs that are being created.
Are there any measures by which life has gotten worse?
Yeah, it depends on who you're looking at, but certainly in the American population, the opioid epidemic is is making life a lot worse for people. In general, they tend to be male, they tend to be less educated, they tend to live in rural areas.
Right.
And those are the ones that are hit. And in almost anything, you can find any measure, you could find some parts of the world, some sectors of the population that are left behind or even going backwards.
But overall, the point is that the trend lines are all pointing north, right?
That's right. I would say virtually all. Again, all these lines have some upticks, some wiggles, sometimes some sickening lurches, like World War I and World War II. One of them, the amount of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere has not been going in a good direction. I mean, we're still pumping a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which would trap heat, possibly melt some of the ice shields, and could get really ugly. But other measures of environmental quality, though, tend to show improvement.
Yeah, you talk about the two biggest concerns that you have, which actually echo something George Shultz said to me the other day, which is nuclear weapons and climate change being your overriding biggest concerns. But I think you say that even in those areas, we are still improving.
There are some improvements, although the last year of the Trump presidency, some of those improvements have been themselves set into reverse, such as a plan to massively expand the country's nuclear arsenal and the upending of the system of international stability by the taunts and threats against Kim Jong-un. Maybe that'll be reversed when Trump meets him personally. But yes, the bigger picture, again, it is, I think, threatened. The bigger picture, though, is that the nuclear arsenal has come down by 85% since the mid-1980s.
Right.
Hardly anyone is aware of that. And by the way, George Shultz is one of 4 famous hawks who have come out in favor of the total abolition of all nuclear weapons. That is getting to zero.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a beautiful dream, but how do you police that? I mean, how do we keep rogue nations like North Korea from getting nukes? How do we keep these, I guess it's a myth, but the suitcase bombs from getting into the wrong hands?
Well, there are, you would need the world's nations who signed on to this program of Global Zero to allow intrusive inspections pretty much anywhere, anytime. And I mean, that's what happens with countries that have signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty so far, and even countries like Iran, the U.S. and the former Soviet Union, now Russia, which allow inspectors from the other side to come in. It was, in fact, when Saddam Hussein would not allow inspectors to look at the suspected facilities, that was a trigger for the 2003 Iraq War. Although, of course, ironically, there there were no nuclear facilities. But the fact that he didn't open the doors and let people see that for himself proved to be his undoing.
You urge people to resist the cynicism of calling this a post-truth era and saying that facts don't matter. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, that claim can't be right because is there any truth to what you just said, that we're living in a post-truth era?
I guess it depends who you ask.
Well, no, because if you say that that it is true, you've just admitted, yeah, there's still truth. It still matters. I have to add that actually today in the Wall Street Journal, my wife, Rebecca Goldstein, has an op-ed arguing this point. Call it "The problem is not truth, the problem is us." This week in the Wall Street Journal.
So we don't want to resign ourselves to this idea that we're living in a post-truth world.
Absolutely.
We want to always be pushing back.
I think it's a corrosive phrase, and I think journalists should just retire it. Some people lie, some politicians lie, some more than others.
Yeah.
We should call them out, but the truth absolutely has to matter. Otherwise, we should just stop talking and just fight.
Sure, but what's the strategy here? Do we just keep hitting people over the heads with facts until they give up, or what?
I don't know what the best tactic is other than constant pressure and ridicule and maybe demonstrations of what you need to do to approach the truth. The fact that if you write for a major paper, you do have to provide sources, you do have to submit to fact-checking, just to maybe open the hood and let people see how it's done in universities and newspapers. And since no one really wants to be called a liar, since no one really wants to say that they're full of crap, we really do stake a claim to the truth. To use that, to leverage that, and even use ridicule to people who accept preposterous conspiracy theories too easily. Appeal to their sense of shame that no one wants to be a liar. No one wants to be duped.
If I went on the street and I had some kind of a political conversation or discussed an issue with someone that I was diametrically opposed to, they would probably think that they were reasoning just the same that I would to my conclusions. So how do you find the objective definition of reason? Yeah,
the problem is that one of our flaws, our fallacies, is that we always think that we're unbiased and that the other guy is biased. So everyone thinks they're reasonable. And partly if you get people together under the right rules of rules of engagement, so to speak, then you when you're forced to explain your position and justify it, when you're forced to characterize the other guy's permission in a statement that's fair enough that he or she would agree to it. When you try to lay out what kind of empirical test would show that you're right or you're wrong, put your money where your mouth is. What does your theory predict would happen if we adopted this policy? Let's find a state that did adopt it and see what happened.
Another thing that concerns you that is sort of the opposite of that tact is political correctness in academia. Trump, of course, said that political correctness was the biggest problem facing America today. I kind of think that's probably overstating things, but from your perspective, is it just a blip on the screen, or does political correctness and shutting down speakers on college campuses, does that rise to the level of being a worrying trend?
It is a worrying trend because the only way you can figure out what's true or not is to get a hypothesis out there so you can analyze it, see what's right with it, what's wrong with it. We're going to have a distorted view of what policies will really help us if there's just certain ideas you can never express, if we just have certain beliefs that are wrong because no one ever allowed you to criticize them. So I think it is a problem, and that science and discussion and debate and policy and analysis all work best when you've got when ideas can be put out there and evaluated.
Is teaching better reasoning skills and better critical thinking, is that something that ought to be taught at the academic level?
I think so, yeah. I think that should be a fundamental part of education, starting in elementary school, that we all are victims of bias and illusion. We do know workarounds of like numeracy, the use of numbers and math. Like debate, you got to defend your position in the face of people who disagree with you. But the standard critical thinking curricula haven't done so hot. That is, you test students at the beginning, test them at the end, see if they're any better. And often they aren't. But that's true of a lot of college courses in general. It's actually much harder to teach people anything than we've appreciated. But what it means is that you've got to use the right pedagogical techniques. If you try to teach critical thinking skill but just by having a professor yammering at the blackboard and a textbook that students drag a yellow marker across, we kind of know now that's just not a good way to teach anything. But if critical thinking is taught more in problems to be solved in small groups that break off and try to solve a problem together while criticizing one another's approaches, then critical thinking skills can be taught. You just have to do it right.
As far as teaching ourselves to reason better independently, is it as simple as seeking out sources and media that differs from your own ideology, or is
I think that's part of it. A crucial first step. It's a necessary condition. But also being challenged to defend your position, challenged even to explain your position. A lot of people have very strong opinions on Obamacare, but you ask them to explain, well, what actually is Obamacare? They kind of go, blah, 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 and they actually have to confess they have no idea. They just know that they like it or don't like it. So even the act of asking people to explain it, and people realize, well, gee, if I don't really understand it, why do I support it so strongly? Maybe I shouldn't support it once it's explained to me, or vice versa.
Is it harder, or do you meet more resistance when you try, particularly in your field, when you try to apply science to social issues? Is that a little bit of a tougher sell?
It absolutely can be. In fact, I wrote a book called The Blank Slate on how my own field, psychology, has been, I think, set back by the doctrine that humans are blank slates. There's no such thing as human nature. We have no inborn or innate traits, but we come into the world blank, and then parents and culture and society kind of write on our slates. And that's where all the operation of our minds comes from. And I suggested in that book that because that people have embraced that false belief, the blank slate, for political reasons, such as you might think if we're blank slates, that's a good argument for equality, because if 0 equals 0 equals 0, if we all come into the world with nothing on our slates, then the genes can't make some of us smarter than others. I argue that that's a mistake, that especially if it's motivated by the desire for political equality, because political equality is a policy. So we're going to treat everyone the same under the law. It's not a claim that people are clones or blank slates. I mean, we have no way of asserting that. But how the government treats you, that should be independent of your race, your religion, your sex, and so on.
And that gets to the last ideal that you talk about in this book, which is humanism. There's been this massive trend, it seems, toward tribalism and nativism over the past few years. Are those at odds with humanism?
They are, because humanism would hold up the individual as our proper concern for morality, and that we shouldn't sacrifice individual people for the good of society. I mean, there are extreme circumstances like a country under attack where you might have a draft, but still in planning for war, be extremely mindful that these are human beings. They're not just infantrymen, that they shouldn't be kind of snipped off the way you might snip off a fingernail, figuring the only thing that matters is the health of the body. That each one of them is a person with a mother and a father, and possibly with children. And with a conscious life that shouldn't be cut short, and so people shouldn't be turned into cannon fodder for the glory of the fatherland or the motherland.
And how do you counter that impulse to help only yourself or your tribe, and to encourage people to embrace a more altruistic ideal? I mean, aren't we motivated by self-interest? Isn't that innate?
Well, we're not just motivated by self-interest, because we love our children, we love our spouses, we love our friends. We feel some loyalty to our teammates and our allies and our colleagues. The challenge is to expand that narrow circle of sympathy so that it doesn't embrace all human beings. And that has been happening partly through literature and history. We see what life is like among people in different countries or different sexes or different ages. Partly when you have people who have to get together and agree on something, their differences are going to have to fall by the wayside, and you're going to have to focus on what they have in common, namely they're human. Mm-hmm. And even when you are in negotiating with someone else, in conversation, in debate, I can't say, well, when we're dividing up stuff, everything should go to me. And you say, why? I say, because I'm me and you're not. I mean, there's no reason you're going to take me seriously. As soon as we have a democratic debate, we're kind of forced to universal human rights and universal morality.
When our grandkids and our grandkids' look back, say 50 years on, what do you think will be the practices still in place today that will just appall the next generations?
It's quite possible that factory farming will strike them as barbaric. It could strike some people that way already. Probably our over-incarceration, that to deal with crime by locking people up for 10, 15, 20 years might be seen as extreme. Hitting children, that's already starting to vanish from some countries, but corporal punishment might be seen as an abomination. And there may be some that we don't know because we're so embedded in our own society that it just seems totally natural to us.
Well, the book is just a really fascinating, remarkable achievement. I encourage everyone to read it. It's called Enlightenment Now, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress in Enlightenment. Dr. Steven Pinker, thanks so much for talking with me.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Professor Steven Pinker for coming on the podcast. Order his new book, Enlightenment Now, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress on Amazon or Audible. Keep up with Steven Pinker at stevenpinker.com or on Twitter at @SAPinker. Today's episode was sponsored by Untuck It. It's never a good look when you untuck a long, bulky dress shirt. That's why Untuck It makes shirts designed to be worn untucked. Casual shirts that are not too long and not too short. Shirts that GQ calls perfection. And I was just telling you how much I love shirts from Untuck It, especially my new favorite shirt, a blue chambray button-down I got from Untuck It just last week. I love it. Check it out for yourself. Log on to untuckit.com and use the promo code KICK for 20% off. Stop hiding your shirt with your pants, or your pants with your shirt. Untuckit.com, your solution to perfecting casual. I also want you to check out adiamore.com/kick for a huge selection of diamonds and jewelry. I recently bought my engagement ring from Adiamore, and my fiancé couldn't be happier. I shopped around, but no one beat Adiamore for the best price and the very best quality. You can go on their site and try different diamonds with different settings until you come up with the perfect ring for you or the woman you love. All of Adiamore's diamonds are GIA certified, and their rings have a lifetime guarantee against material defects. Plus, Adiamore even gives you 30 days to evaluate the deal and make sure that you're 100% happy with your purchase. That's because the folks at Adiamore know that once you find a jeweler you can trust, you've got a jeweler for life and you'll keep coming back year after year. So do yourself a favor. If you're shopping for an engagement ring or even a nice gift, even if you think you're going to buy from another dealer, before you make that big decision, you owe it to yourself to click on adiamore.com/kick, look at their selection and compare. That's adiamore.com/kick. adiamor.com/kick. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Kickass News on iTunes and leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook or on Twitter at @KickassNewsPod. And as always, I welcome your comments, questions, and ideas at comments@kickassnews.com. I'm Ben Mathis, and thanks for listening to Kickass News. Kickass News is a trademark of Mathis Entertainment, Inc.